Imagine you're scrolling through your phone late at night and you land on an article about Revelation. Maybe someone shared it. Maybe the algorithm sent it your way. The headline is dramatic. The comments underneath are full of people who are either terrified or completely checked out, and you sit there thinking, I want to understand this book. I really do. But every time I try, I feel like I need a decoder ring just to get past chapter 4. That feeling is not a sign that you lack faith. It is a sign that Revelation was written inside a very specific world of symbols, and we are reading it from the outside, looking in. The good news is that most of those symbols have roots. They grow out of older scripture. When you trace them back, they stop feeling random and start feeling intentional. That is what this video is for. We are going to walk through 6 of the most recognized symbols in Revelation, not to frighten you and not to hand you a political timeline, but to give you enough biblical background that the imagery begins to breathe. Steady, careful. Let's start. The first symbol is the lampstands. In Revelation chapter 1, John turns to see who is speaking to him, and he sees 7 golden lampstands. Standing among them is a figure described in overwhelming terms. The 7 lampstands, we are told directly in verse 20, represent the 7 churches. So right away, Revelation gives us its own interpretation. We do not have to guess, but even that explanation carries weight you might miss without the background. Go back to Exodus. When Moses constructed the tabernacle, the lampstand, called the menorah, was placed in the holy place. It burned continuously. It was the light within the dwelling of God. Later, in Zechariah chapter 4, the prophet sees a golden lampstand and is told it represents the Spirit of God at work. So when John sees 7 lampstands and sees Jesus walking among them, the imagery is saying something rich. These communities of believers are positioned where Israel's tabernacle light once burned. Christ himself moves among them as the one who sustains that light. If this kind of careful Bible study is something you want more of, consider subscribing to this channel. There are no sensational claims here, just the text, the background, and a steady pace. Now, the 7 seals. Revelation chapter 5 introduces a scroll sealed with 7 seals, and the question is asked, who is worthy to open it? The scene is set in a throne room. The scroll appears to contain the unfolding of history and judgment. When Jesus is identified as the one worthy to open it, because he was slain and has redeemed people from every nation, the seals begin to break. Here is a common misunderstanding. Many people read the seals as a countdown clock to modern events, a calendar you can match to news headlines. But the imagery of sealed scrolls in the ancient world was legal language. In the book of Daniel, the prophet is told to seal up the vision because it concerns a distant time. In Isaiah chapter 29, God describes a sealed book that the unlearned cannot read. Sealed documents in that culture were covenants, legal transfers, records of judgment. What Revelation chapter 5 is doing is portraying Jesus as the one with the legal authority and moral worthiness to execute what God has purposed. It is a courtroom scene, not a newspaper. The 7 trumpets follow the seals and echo a pattern you will recognize once you have spent time in Exodus. When the trumpets sound in Revelation chapters 8 and 9, the plagues that follow, hail and fire, water turning bitter, darkness. These are not novel horrors. They are deliberately constructed to sound like the plagues of Egypt. The audience hearing Revelation read aloud in the 1st century would have caught this immediately. John is not being random. He is using the Exodus story as a template to say that God, who delivered his people from oppressive power before, is doing something in that same pattern again. The deeper Bible pattern here matters. Exodus was the defining act of rescue in Israel's story. When the prophets wanted to speak of future rescue, they often reached for Exodus language. Isaiah does this in chapters 40 and 43. He speaks of a new Exodus, a new crossing, a new freedom from captivity. Revelation picks up that thread and weaves it into its vision of ultimate rescue from every kind of oppression. The trumpets are not just chaos. They are a structured echo of a God who acts in history. Now we come to the beasts. This is where many people feel the most anxiety, and it is understandable. The beast from the sea in Revelation 13 is terrifying in its description, but go back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel sees 4 great beasts rising from the sea, representing successive empires. The imagery of beasts representing kingdoms and governing powers was already established in the prophetic tradition long before John wrote a single word. When Revelation uses beast imagery, it is drawing on a symbolic vocabulary that Daniel's audience already knew. What the beast represents in Revelation is a system of power that demands absolute loyalty, that persecutes those who will not conform, and that presents itself as ultimate authority. The number associated with it, 666, was a method called gematria, where letters correspond to numerical values. For the original audience, this kind of numerical symbolism was a way of pointing at something real without naming it openly, which was important for people living under political danger. The beast is not a singular mystery figure waiting in a bunker somewhere. It is a portrait of a pattern that has repeated across history and that the original readers were living through in real time. Babylon in Revelation is a name layered with memory. In the Hebrew Bible, Babylon was the empire that destroyed Jerusalem, that took God's people into exile, that represented everything opposed to covenant faithfulness. By the time John writes Revelation, Babylon had long since fallen as a physical city. So when Revelation speaks of Babylon the Great, the city on 7 hills, the reader is meant to recognize that John is using Babylon as a symbol for any system that operates by Babylon's logic. Domination, exploitation, the crushing of the vulnerable for the comfort of the powerful. The 7 hills language would have pointed clearly to Rome for John's original audience, but the symbol is larger than one city in 1 century. It is a category, and then the bride. Revelation ends not with destruction as the final word, but with a wedding. The New Jerusalem descends as a bride adorned for her husband. This is the payoff the whole book has been building toward. But even here, the roots go deep. In the Hebrew prophets, Israel is often described as the wife of God. Hosea speaks of it. Isaiah speaks of it. The covenant relationship between God and His people is consistently described in marriage language throughout the Old Testament. When Revelation closes with a bride, it is completing a love story that began in the Hebrew Scriptures. The final image of Revelation is not a ruined world, it is a renewed one. A city where God dwells with humanity, where every old wound is addressed, and where the covenant is fully kept. Here is a practical test you can apply when you encounter Revelation's imagery. Ask 3 questions. First, is this symbol explained anywhere within Revelation itself? The book often interprets its own imagery. Second, does this image appear in Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, or Zechariah? Those prophets used much of the same symbolic vocabulary. Third, is the interpretation you are hearing grounded in the text, or does it require you to ignore the historical context and plug in modern events? Grounding matters. It protects you from reading your anxieties into Scripture rather than reading Scripture carefully. None of this means Revelation is simple. It is a complex and carefully constructed book, but complexity is not the same as chaos. The imagery is strange only when you approach it from outside the tradition that produced it. Once you start following the threads back through Daniel, through Exodus, through the Hebrew prophets, the picture becomes less like a horror film and more like a library, full of voices speaking across centuries with a consistent message. God sees, God acts, the covenant holds. If you have made it this far, here is the question I want to leave in the comments for you. Which of these 6 symbols, the lampstands, the seals, the trumpets, the beasts, Babylon, or the bride, had the most context you were missing before today? Let me know below. Your answer will help shape what this channel digs into next.